The Committee on Homeland Security will come to order. The committee is meeting today to consider what the future of Homeland Security policymaking at the White House should look like, and whether or not the existing National Security Council and Homeland Security Council structures should be reconsidered. The Homeland Security Council was stood up in 2001 in the wake of September 11th attacks to enhance our nation's ability to deter, detect, prevent, and respond to terrorism. Later that year, when Congress authorized the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, the decision was made to also codify in law the Homeland Security Council. The language of Title IX sets forth the composition and mission of the Council. The Homeland Security Council is responsible for providing advice to the President on Homeland Security policies based on assessments of our nation's risks. It is also charged with overseeing, reviewing, and making recommendations to the President on federal Homeland Security policies. In its short history, the Homeland Security Council, by most accounts, has been an important driver of preparedness and response activities throughout the nation. With the change in administration, the timing is right for asking key questions about how we've been doing Homeland Security policy making over the past 8 years is still the right way to go. The President is to be commended for issuing Presidential Directive 1, which establishes a study team to examine how to improve security policymaking at the White House. As the study team is hard at work developing its recommendations, I thought it would benefit the committee for us to hear from people who know all too well about the challenges of the current Homeland Security policymaking apparatus. I thank our distinguished panel of witnesses for being here to participate in one of our favorite Washington pastimes, the game of speculation. For my part, I've been given some thought to the potential outcomes of the study, which should emerge in late April, and see it going one of three ways. Number one, they could propose dissolving the Homeland Security Council into the National Security Council. Number two, they could propose retaining a two-council system that is more integrated. Or number three, they could propose eliminating both councils in favor of creating a new council to handle full continuum of security issues, everything from nonproliferation to emergency response. There are strong cases to be made for better integration of Homeland Security and national security policies. Whether a structural merger of the two White House councils is the best way to achieve better integration remains to be seen. However, this committee, given our oversight responsibility, has a vested interest in making certain that whatever comes out of the White House review actually enhances Homeland Security. Findings should be able to pass a basic three-part test. Number one, first, will the findings enhance the nation's security? Second, will the Department of Homeland Security's effectiveness be bolstered? And third, will the findings enhance the voice of state, local, and tribal authorities, our nation's first preventers in the White House? I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today on this important issue. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from New York, Mr. King, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for scheduling this hearing, because it really is on a topic which I think many of us probably have opinions, but not fully formed opinions. And I think it is important that we determine what the best direction for the President to go in and the country to go in. I also want to welcome our witnesses this morning, especially thank Mr. Weinstein and Ms. Townsend for their service to our country. And I want to assure Ms. Townsend that I am looking after the welfare of her mother, who is a constituent of mine. And you said she was thinking of moving. Tell her at least stick around to the next election. It could be close. I don't want to lose any unnecessary votes. Thank you.
Doesn't matter where in New York she is for the next election, right?
That's right. Mr. Chairman, as I said, I do not have a fully formed opinion on this. My inclination right now, my belief is, though, that we should not be separating out the Homeland Security Council from the National Security Council. And having said that, I don't think there's any guaranteed system which ensures success or one which would bring about failure. I believe even if there were a merger and the President had a strong working relationship with the Homeland Security advisor, and that advisor could go to the President in times of emergency if it had direct access, it would work. And a lot does depend on the personalities involved. A lot does depend on the extent of the relationship. It would depend on other people at the Council, including the head of the NSC. My concern, though, is putting in place a system which would work even if all of the actors, all the characters are not doing their job perfectly. Have a system in place where if things do go wrong, the system itself would better provide for success. And I just have a number of concerns about what would happen if there were a merger and there were not this excellent relationship between the President and the Homeland Security advisor. For instance, my concern is, and this is true of the Congress and of the country, that each day we go beyond September 11th, the issue of Homeland Security recesses into people's minds. They forget the significance of it, or not forget, but they put it away, and it doesn't have that cutting-edge importance that I believe it should have at all times. That's just human nature. And we are going to be having ongoing conflicts, whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, or wherever. That's just the reality of the world we live in, where we're going to have ongoing foreign crises, and it would be human nature for more attention to be focused on them. Also, within the administration itself, I think any administration, people tend to go where the power is or the influence is or what the hot-button topic of the day is, and I just see that could more and more be foreign policy as opposed to Homeland Security. And I know they're overlapping. I know there's an interrelationship between the two, obviously, but on the other hand, there are also real distinctions between the two. And so again, I would have the concern that those distinctions could run the risk of not being fully appreciated and realized as we go forward. And I say this, and I know that Ms. Harman probably disagrees with me on this, but I think the administration does make a mistake by not using the term terrorism. And I think so long as that is not used, it also can create among people that say looking for positions or looking for jobs or looking for positions of influence in an administration, that Homeland Security would not have that sense of importance that it obviously had after September 11th and the years after that. So because of that, my inclination right now is to think that the two should be kept separate. Having said that, I have no doubt that President Obama and John Brennan or whatever will have an excellent relationship, will get the job done, and will do what has to be done. But I'm thinking more of the institutional protections we need, and I don't think that would be fully addressed. My concern is it would not be fully addressed if this separation occurred. And with that, I look forward to the hearing and yield back the balance of my time.
Other members of the committee are reminded that under the committee rules, opening statements may be submitted for the record. Again, I welcome our witnesses to today's hearing. Mr. Weinstein was appointed, our first witness was appointed to by President George W. Bush as Assistant for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism. He's previously served in leadership positions at the FBI and the First Assistant Attorney General for National Security at the U.S. Department of Justice. Ms. Townsend served as Assistant to President George Bush for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism from 2004 to 2008. As of sometime this week, she's now with Baker Botts LLP as a partner. Congratulations. Nothing like a real job, right? Congratulations, as I said. And prior to her service at the White House, she served in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan and as the Assistant Commandant for Intelligence of the U.S. Coast Guard. Mr. Palin, welcome. As a senior fellow with the National Institute for Strategic Preparedness and has authored major papers in the area of emergency preparedness. Mr. Frazier is Executive Director of the Major Cities Chiefs Association, which represents the police chief of the 56 largest police agencies in the United States and Canada. Welcome also, Mr. Frazier. Mr. Hoffman is currently a professor at the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. He is a thought leader, and a recognized scholar in counterterrorism and national security affairs. Without objections, the witness's full statement will be inserted in the record. I now recognize each witness to summarize his or her statements for 5 minutes, beginning with Mr. Weinstein.
Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member King, members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before you today. I want to thank the committee for holding this hearing and for its invaluable work over the years to build this Homeland Security infrastructure that protects our nation and our people. I applaud President Obama's decision to undertake a review of the structure of the Homeland Security Council at this time. I also completely agree with his statement that, quote, Homeland Security is indistinguishable from national security. If there is one lesson that we learned from the attacks of September 11th, it was that the traditional distinctions between international security and domestic security have lost much of their meaning. While it is true that Homeland Security is part and parcel of national security, it does not necessarily follow that there has to be a single unified coordinating mechanism for both. Conversely, the fact that Homeland Security is a priority doesn't necessarily mean that the White House has to devote an interagency council to that mission. Whenever we undertake to organize or to reorganize government operations, there's a natural tension between the interest in having all relevant operations in a unitary structure and the countervailing interest in separating those operations to ensure that each has its own identity and the resources, support, and high-level attention that often come with that separate identity. I've seen this issue play out in different contexts at other points in my career. When I served at the FBI, for example, the 9/11 Commission and others engaged in a lengthy debate over whether the Bureau's intelligence function should remain consolidated with its law enforcement function or be separated out and assigned to a new agency. Similarly, several years back, there was a debate whether Department of Justice intelligence attorneys and national security prosecutors should remain in separate divisions or be consolidated into a single new division, an issue that Congress resolved by creating the National Security Division that I had the honor to lead. Each of these debates highlighted the trade-offs at play when deciding whether to separate or consolidate government functions. The organizational issue before the committee today highlights the same trade-offs. In deciding whether to keep or to change the current structure, it's useful to review the accomplishments that the current structure has achieved. These include, first and foremost, the fact that the very existence of the HSC sent a clear message that Homeland Security was and remains a high priority. Second, the Homeland Security Council coordinated and oversaw the growth of myriad Homeland Security functions that were underdeveloped, nascent, or simply non-existent prior to 9/11. Third, the stand-up to the HSC allowed the White House to assemble a staff with expertise in Homeland Security fields like port security, pandemic planning, and disaster response, some of which understandably did not figure very prominently in White House staffing prior to that time. Also, the HSC played an important role in fostering the growth and maturation of the newly established Department of Homeland Security by helping DHS work through difficult interdisciplinary issues with other agencies and departments and keeping its issues and concerns on the President's agenda. And lastly, the existence of the HSC relieved the National Security Advisor of the responsibility of overseeing the Homeland Security buildup. I cite these benefits not to suggest that they will accrue only if we retain the current structure, but rather to ensure that these benefits are considered and taken into account when deciding how to reconfigure that structure. My experience as Homeland Security Advisor left me firmly convinced that the White House must exercise a strong coordinating role among the varied players that share in that mission. I therefore believe that any new policy coordinating structure should meet the following prerequisites. First, the person serving the function of the Homeland Security Advisor, no matter what his or her title, should be vested with the requisite authority and stature to coordinate and broker agreements among cabinet officers and departments. Second, the Homeland Security Advisor should have sufficient access to the President. Third, the interagency process devoted to Homeland Security issues, no matter whether conducted under the HSC or under a combined entity, should have the same status and authority as that devoted to national security issues. Also, those who work within the new structure will need to work cooperatively and collegially in those areas of shared and overlapping responsibilities that necessarily arise between the Homeland and national security portfolios. And finally, the White House should make sure to devote the resources necessary to build and maintain a Homeland Security staff with the requisite expertise and size to handle the vast portfolio of the Homeland Security mission. Any organizational model that follows these operating principles has the potential both to maintain the priority of Homeland Security and to build upon and improve the performance of the HSC under the current structure. I thank the committee for soliciting my views on this important subject, and I applaud you for holding this hearing. Your concern about this subject is a strong reminder that Homeland Security is and must remain a front-burner issue, and it helps to ensure that the Homeland Security coordinating structure of the future will be strong, effective, and recognized by all as a critically important piece of our national security apparatus. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member King, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I now recognize Ms. Townsend to summarize her statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too would like to thank you for the opportunity. It's a particular privilege for me to appear before this committee, Mr. Chairman, because Congressman King is my hometown congressman, and I have had the privilege of working with not only you, sir, but a number
I won't hold that against you, by the way.
a number of members on the committee, including Congresswoman Harman, Congressman Carney. So it's a real privilege for me to be here today. There is no more solemn responsibility that the President bears than to protect the American people. And during my 4.5 years at the White House, I came to believe that for this reason, organization should be dictated by effectiveness. How best to maximize effectiveness will inevitably change over time as we, as a country, continue to weaken al-Qaeda and other enemies, and as the Department of Homeland Security gains strength. You will not be surprised, based on your experience with me, therefore, that my view of this issue is a pragmatic one. This is not one that I think lends itself to sort of an easy assessment of an organizational chart. And I'd like to just suggest to you a framework in which you might consider this issue. I think it really comes down to 3 fundamental criteria of any organization. First, there has to be a single person who is both responsible and accountable to the President, who monitors threat information and who has the authority to marshal all instruments of national power: military, intelligence, law enforcement, economic, diplomatic, and public diplomacy to defeat the threat. The individual cannot wait until threats arrive on our shores, but must have the responsibility and means to identify those threats where they originate and to ensure a coordinated response to them. The President's Homeland Security Advisor must not be constrained by geographic boundaries that our enemies do not respect. Second, the Homeland Security Advisor must have direct and immediate access to the President. Ultimately, if terrorists successfully were to strike the United States, it is the President and not his staff who will be rightly held accountable by the American people for the failure. The Homeland Security Advisor must be able to get to the President quickly without the clearance from his or her colleagues on the White House staff. Unfortunately, there will be times when American lives are at stake, and the President will need to be advised and operational decisions taken and communicated to the relevant Cabinet Secretary in real time. These sorts of crises do not lend themselves to normal bureaucratic process. Third, the Homeland Security issues faced by our government are diverse and many. They range from preparedness and response to natural disasters to pandemic planning and biological and nuclear threats. These issues are often distinct from the more traditional foreign policy issues faced by the National Security Council and require experienced staff with significant expertise. The staff must understand state and local emergency management policy issues and concerns, and in that regard, during my time, I had the privilege to work with Mr. Frazier and a number of other state and local officials. The White House must be organized not simply to facilitate the Homeland Security policy process, but also to anticipate and respond to state and local political leaders in times of crisis. The Homeland Security Advisor requires adequate staffing to deal with both counterterrorism and Homeland Security issues. Mr. Chairman, I do believe we remain a nation at war with a very determined enemy. We have troops deployed in both Iraq and Afghanistan, but the National Security Advisor has many important responsibilities in addition to those 2 theaters. For example, he must contend with the Middle East peace process, counterproliferation around the world in places like Iran and North Korea. I worry that increasing the span of control of the National Security Advisor could dilute the Homeland Security mission and make it just one more item on an already overburdened list. That said, I wish to be clear. We should judge any reorganization by the substance and criteria that I have suggested above. We must be careful not to assume that a merger means the President cares less about Homeland Security, and we must resist, as I have said, this easy organizational chart test and look to the substance of how responsibilities are allocated and how we are being protected. Again, I would suggest that the committee look at 3 fundamental questions. 1, is there one person responsible and accountable to the President who looks around the world at threats and advises the President? Second, does this one person have direct and immediate access to the President? And third, does this person have adequate staff to fulfill his or her responsibilities, both at a national level and to state and local leaders? These are the questions that we should be asking and the criteria against which we should judge this effort. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member King, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I now recognize Mr. Palin to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member King, members of the committee, as I have reviewed the plethora of reports and recommendations on how we might reorganize Homeland Security Council, and as I've listened carefully to the rumors emerging from the PSD1 interview process, I have become concerned that well-intended parties are trying to remove politics from Homeland Security. This would be a serious mistake. I hope we can minimize partisanship in Homeland Security. But in my judgment, we need more, not less, politics in Homeland Security. And the Homeland Security Council is uniquely positioned to play a crucial role in domestic political organization for Homeland Security. The Homeland Security Council is a political creature. It is the legitimate child of the executive and the legislature. Both mother and father wanted it. The executive has been inclined, I think, to treat the HSC as its sole creation. But Congress was wise enough to enshrine HSC in Title IX of the Homeland Security Act. There is joint custody. This joint custody gives the HSC its legitimacy and provides the foundation for its potential coming of age as a profoundly important political player. I suggest 3 especially important roles for Homeland Security Council. First, supporting the President's role in prevention, mitigation, response, and recovery to catastrophic threats of every sort, intentional, accidental, and natural. Second, supporting the President's role in working with the governors and the Homeland Security leadership of the states in framing and executing a shared strategy of prevention, mitigation, response, and recovery. And third, fulfilling the risk assessment role of the Homeland Security Council as set out in Title IX. The Congress, perhaps someone on this committee, bestowed on your child a crucial responsibility. Section 904 of the title states that the first function of the HSC is to assess the objectives, commitments, and risks to the United States in the interest of Homeland Security. This is precisely right. Assessing our comparative risk is the essential foundation of Homeland Security. Assessing risk is a profoundly political process. Risk assessment can and must draw on technical resources, but choosing which risk is most risky is a political choice, by which I mean it is a choice that can only be made by people of different perspectives who come together to reason with one another. It is especially important that the federal government reason together with the states on preparedness, prevention, mitigation, response, recovery, and other activities that will seem exotic to specialists in the national security sphere. Practically, the states have the local resources to prevent, mitigate, respond, and recover. Constitutionally, the states are where the founders meant for such power and authority principally to reside. This nuanced engagement in domestic politics strikes me as ill-matched to the strengths of the National Security Council. The NSC behaves as it ought to support the President's role as Commander-in-Chief. The role of the President and his administration in working with the states is an entirely different matter. The federal and state governments need to reason together. The Department of Homeland Security cannot do this alone. As a former governor, Secretary Napolitano can do it better than most. Judith Kayam, the new Assistant Secretary for Intergovernmental Programs will contribute a great deal, but the department, to do its work effectively, must have an ongoing and meaningful dialogue going on between the White House and the governor's mansions on shared Homeland Security policy and strategy. As you know so well, politics is about building coalitions and motivating support for tough choices. When the choices are too tough for enthusiasm, politics cultivates self-interested compliance through a process of shared choosing. In Homeland Security, we must make tough choices. The President's Homeland Security Advisor and his or her HSC staff should be, and are needed to be, the President's trusted agents in crafting the political compact with the states to make those tough choices. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I now recognize Mr. Frazier to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member King, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the potential merger of the National Security Council and the Homeland Security Council. My name is Tom Frazier. I'm the Executive Director of the Major City Police Chiefs Association. MCC is the association of chiefs of the 56 largest municipal police departments in the United States. We are the chief executive officers of departments located in metropolitan areas of more than 500,000 and employ more than 1,000 law enforcement officers. Collectively, these departments are first responders to over 50 million residents in our country. On February 23rd of this year, President Obama issued Presidential Directive 1 on organizing Homeland Security and counterterrorism. The Assistant to the President for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism was instructed to lead an interagency review of ways to reform the organization. The directive requires this review to be completed within 60 days. Before discussing our specific views on the potential merger of the NSC and the HSC, I'd like to set the stage a bit by articulating our perspective of these two organizations and how we, as local first responders, fit into the respective missions. First, the NSC. Established by the National Defense Act in 1947, the NSC was originally defined as an organization dealing in military and diplomatic issues beyond the U.S. borders. The NSC was and is staffed by personnel from DOD, the State Department, and subject matter experts with an intelligence community background. NSPD-1, signed by President George Bush on February 13, 2001, reiterated this NSC focus by stating, "National security includes the defense of the United States of America, protection of our constitutional system of government, and the advancement of U.S. interests around the globe. National security also depends on America's opportunity to prosper and the world economy." This external focus fulfills a vital national need, but has no components with backgrounds or experience in dealing with the vastly different needs and constitutional responsibilities of state governments and their tribal and local partners. Public safety leadership has only recently had their domestic viewpoint represented in this forum. Now the HSC. Established by HSPD-1, its mission was defined as ensuring coordination of all Homeland Security-related activities among executive departments and agencies and promoting the effective development and implementation of all Homeland Security policies. We see the missions of these two bodies as being fundamentally different. These differences become clear when you look at the backgrounds of the principal decision makers. National security decision makers are primarily federal and accustomed to working at a high level of federal engagement. Homeland security decision makers include federal, but equally and perhaps more importantly, are state, tribal, local, and private sector partners. While the NSC deals with issues that rarely involve state, tribal, local, and private sector entities, the HSC must deal with the interests and the constitutional responsibilities of state governments of these partners on nearly every issue. Now let's consider jurisdictions, a fundamental concept of law enforcement. The NSC deals with military and diplomatic issues beyond the jurisdictions of state, tribal, and local governments. The HSC, however, deals in an entirely different environment where states have constitutionally defined responsibilities over domestic incidents that the federal government may not share. Response to disasters belongs with the jurisdiction in which it occurs. The Homeland Security continuum of prevent, protect, respond, recover is one in which the federal role is to help plan, coordinate, and support effective programs which build the collective national capacity for implementation of the activities mentioned earlier. Our recent experience with the new federal entities, specifically the National Counterterrorism Center and its State and Local Analytics Cell, or ITAGG, is also instructive. A presidential advisor whose sole responsibility was Homeland Security was critically important to our nation's internal ability to identify domestic security threats. As our newly combined efforts come to maturity, policy and funding issues that would be lost in an international effort will still receive the focus and importance that is required. When viewed from these perspectives, it is clear to us at the state and local level of government that our role in the NSC is minimal. Our partners in the emergency management and fire professions agree. It is equally clear that our collective roles in the HSC are fundamental. We do not advocate preservation of the status quo. There are clearly areas where the HSC can be significantly improved, which may be a good topic for a follow-on hearing. But we see a merger of the HSC and the NSC as a bad idea, one sure to muddle both missions while a newly created DHS absorbs change and settles down. There are many opportunities to streamline, to improve communication, and to meet jointly. Let's pursue these first, while also working to improve the budget, staffing, and subject matter expertise within the HSC itself. On behalf of the Major City Chiefs Association, I want to thank you for allowing MCC to submit its comments on the important work that you do. We look forward to continued interaction with the committee on strategies to address this and future issues, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I now recognize Professor Hoffman to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member King, for the opportunity to testify before the committee on this important issue. Mom, I'm in Somalia. Don't worry about me. I'm okay, was how 17-year-old Burhan Hassan's worried mother discovered where her son had gone weeks after he and 5 other Somali-American youths disappeared from their homes in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. According to Abdusalam Adam, a teacher and community leader, up to now, no one knows who recruited them, but they obviously did not wake up one morning and decide to go to Somalia. Suspicions have focused on a largely unknown radical Somali organization called AlShabaab. Interestingly, the most credible terrorist threat that had surrounded Barack Obama's inauguration as the 44th President of the United States had come not from al-Qaeda or its leader, Osama bin Laden, or his deputy, Ayman al-Zawahiri, but from these youths and al-Shabaab. Although the threat never materialized, it nonetheless shed important light on the albeit obscure terrorist group that in fact presents U.S. authorities with the most serious evidence to date of a homegrown terrorist recruitment problem, right here in the American heartland. More worrisome still is the fact that the first time authorities reportedly learned of this potential threat was when the families of the 3 boys came forward with information about their departure. Recently, new evidence has come to light which suggests that the 6 Somali Americans were only part of a larger contingent of U.S. citizens lured to Somalia. As many as 30 persons are believed to have left the United States to train in terrorism and guerrilla warfare in that violence-plagued East African country. Indications that recruitment of U.S. nationals to train in Somalia was not a problem restricted to the Minneapolis-St. Paul area have also surfaced. These developments raise anew serious concerns about America's homeland security and the threat of new terrorist attacks. Protecting and securing the United States from terrorism, it has long been argued, ultimately depends on state, local, and tribal law enforcement officers, who are both the first and last lines of homeland defense. Their familiarity with the communities which they patrol enables these officers to observe and detect criminal activity that may indicate a terrorist plot and thus thwart its commission. Hence, effectively countering terrorism is more than a technical issue involving top-down federal guidance, direction, and intelligence dissemination. Rather, it requires that state, local, and tribal agencies have the requisite training, education, knowledge, and up-to-date intelligence to identify and respond effectively and appropriately to these threats. Given that my expertise is on terrorists and their behavior and not on the U.S. government and its bureaucratic national security structure, I cannot provide a definitive answer in respect of the current proposal to fold the HSC into the NSC. What does, though, seem clear is that this proposed consolidation will only work provided that state, local, and tribal law enforcement have a strong, forceful, and credible representative and advocate on the NSC governing all matters pertaining to homeland security. That is not only terrorism, but disaster preparedness and response, infrastructure protection, border security, immigration, incident management, and health and medical planning and response. The United States has, of course, come a long way since the establishment of the HSC and the DHS in terms of both the capacity and capability to defend our nation against terrorist attack. But as the Somali case and the surprising international reach of a hitherto obscure and local terrorist movement demonstrates, we are faced with a continuing terrorist threat from al-Qaeda and associated movements that is at once as operationally durable as it is evolutionary and elusive in character. Accordingly, in so dynamic a threat environment, our responses and preparations need to be equally as evolutionary, flexible, and robust. President Obama's first presidential study directive embraces this notion in its call for a comprehensive interagency review of our national and homeland security architecture. Although the logic behind this statement is indisputable, it must a priori acknowledge that homeland security encompasses concepts and missions that do not necessarily fit comfortably with traditionally defined national security priorities and concerns. Further, the President and Congress will need to be convinced that state, local, and tribal homeland security authorities will have a forceful champion in any reorganization of the HSC who can effectively serve as their advocate, explaining their needs and expectations and ensuring federal responsiveness. These needs will invariably be different from traditional national security concerns because states and localities, not federal agencies, will often be in the lead in many homeland security missions. In sum, the cop on the street may likely be the key player in disrupting and preventing a terrorist incident. Police officers not only need to know what to look for, but what they are looking for may be a small piece of a larger puzzle that may reveal broader links with terrorists either in this country or abroad. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. We will have a series of votes. I will try to get through my questions and yours, Pete, if that's good. And it'll take about 60 minutes to do that, and we'll come back. We appreciate the divergence of testimony of the witnesses this morning, and we got exactly what we were looking for. And I guess to the five of you, if you could, for me, if the President ultimately decided to dissolve the Homeland Security Council, and if legislation is required going forward, what can you tell us as to how we can best ensure state and local and tribal partners will be integrated into the policy-making apparatus? I'll start with you, Mr. Weinstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that there have been a number of studies done and proposals, and I think Mr. Palin referenced them. And one component of many of these proposals has been to have either a series of liaisons within the new entity that are liaisons to state, local, and tribal, or an advisory committee, or both. And there have been some lookbacks to the HSAC advisory committee that was instituted 7 years ago, and how that fared and whether it was the extent to which it was effective or not sufficiently effective in keeping state, local, and tribals linked up. And my sense is, in talking to the folks who are doing the study for President Obama, is that they're looking at a number of different mechanisms like that and are very focused on the concern of keeping a tight connection with state, local, and tribal. So their proposal might well have some feature like that, which I guess could then become a piece of any resulting legislation that comes out of Congress.
Mr. Chairman, my concern about liaisons and advisory committees is that they tend not to have daily input, sort of be part of the DNA of the new organization, sufficient, and bring sufficient muscle to it. One of the things that I had tried to do, it was very difficult at the time, but I think needs to be looked at, is actually integrating state and local officials into the council, whatever the structure is actually having them serve. So there's a daily voice and a daily reminder. One of the most beneficial things in my background was the fact that I had been a local prosecutor before I entered the federal government, and my understanding was based on my own experience. And so bringing people like that, I worked with Commissioner Kelly of the NYPD to have an officer assigned so that I had somebody constantly looking at every issue and bringing that perspective to it. And I think that's important. And it's not sufficient for it just to be in the department. The department does have an intergovernmental liaison. You need somebody at the political level at the White House who's engaging with political leaders at the state and local level, including chiefs of police and elected officials.
Mr. Palin.
I heard the question to relate to statutory adjustments that might be made, and I don't think this committee will like my answer, because I think if, in fact, the HSC is done away with, and the Congress agrees that that is in the White House self-interest, I think the best way to take care of the assurances that, and the important assurances that you've asked about, Mr. Chairman, is for the National Security Act to be amended.
Well, we didn't ask for agreement by witnesses, so you won't hurt our feelings. Thank you very much. Mr. Frazier.
Mr. Chairman, as the ITAGG brings a state and local perspective to National Counterterrorism Center, and a valuable perspective, the traditional intelligence collection world does not see things through the same lens that an experienced state and local investigator or executive does. And I use that example to say that inside the NSC, it would be necessary to have and I agree with Ms. Townsend, a full-time component that can represent that point of view. Our perpetual difficulty with the Department of Homeland Security is that there are so few law and fire practitioners in the decision-making machinery that things occur that when you have to put them into practice on the ground, they just don't make sense. And the only way to, in my view, prevent those kinds of mistakes from occurring is to have someone at a level to provide input before decisions are made.
Thank you. Professor Hoffman.
Well, the benefits of going last, I agree completely with Ms. Townsend and Mr. Frazier. I think the stakeholders in Homeland Security issues are very different than for those in stereotypical national security issues, and there has to be that strong representation present in the White House as well as at the DHS.
Thank you. Gentleman from New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask Mr. Weinstein and Ms. Townsend, again, based on their real-life experience in the White House, and I'll exclude this administration for now, but every administration up till now has strong personalities, often with competing interests, with best of intentions, but turf battles become a reality. And based on your experience, if the Homeland Security Advisor does not have that independent status, what are the chances with a dominant personality as the head of the NSC who does not share your concerns on Homeland Security, and it can be very well-intentioned, could that freeze you out or minimize the importance of the Homeland Security Advisor?
Congressman King, you're absolutely right. I mean, I enjoyed an extraordinary relationship both with Secretary Rice when she was the National Security Advisor, and you remember Steve Hadley was a deputy, an equal of mine, before he was promoted, and then he and I were both equals as assistants to the President. And so I didn't have that problem. I will tell you my concern about the merger is that's why I said one of my fundamental criteria is direct access to the President. If what a reorganization and a merger means is that the Homeland Security has to report through the National Security Advisor, yeah, you do have the opportunity for that person, if there's a conflict or if there's a personality problem between the two, to be frozen out of the process to influence directly the President. I mean, I have a lot of confidence in both Jim Jones and John Brennan, so I don't imagine that even in this administration, but you do worry. The second point to that, I would say, is rank actually, as you are well aware, in this town really matters. And so if you want the individual who's got responsibility for the Homeland Security matters to be able to resolve either a conflict between cabinet members or a conflict between federal policy and state and locals, and by the way, the ITAGG is the perfect example. Here was a case where Congresswoman Harman called me, was very exercised about ensuring that we had local representation at the NCTC. And we were able to resolve that, but that was a conflict between, at the federal level over policy that required the Homeland Security Advisor to actually sit down with the Cabinet Secretary and break through it to make sure we got that done. And so you need somebody with the rank and the access to be able to actually break through all that and get a Cabinet Secretary or Cabinet Secretaries to answer the phone call and resolve it.
Mr. Weinstein?
Yes, Congressman King, appreciate the question. Like Fran, I had the pleasure of working with Steve Hadley, who was wonderful. If anything, he bent over backwards to include me and include HSC and to make sure that our issues got the highest level of attention. And my sense is that the folks in those positions now share that approach. But it is a real concern, and there are a number of different ways of addressing it or making sure that the subordination of Homeland Security issues doesn't come to pass in the future. And Fran, I think, has touched on many of them, but I can't emphasize how important it is that the Homeland Security Advisor and his or her people are fully represented in National Security Council meetings. If this ends up being in the National Security Council, the Homeland Security Advisor needs to be there in those meetings, and very importantly, needs to have a set schedule of meetings with the President in the Oval Office. The National Security Advisor, just because of the pace and the nature of the job, is going to spend a lot of time with the President. The Homeland Security Advisor won't necessarily spend as much time, but needs to have those designated times he or she is in the Oval Office. That makes sure that there's an opportunity to get those issues on the President's plate and make sure that the profile of those issues stays high. So that's why, as I said in my introductory remarks, it's important to put a structure in place that ensures high-level attention.
And I want to make it clear, from my experience with the Bush administration, I'm sure it's going to be the Obama administration too, I don't necessarily foresee a Homeland Security problem, but human nature being what it is, I do know from dealing with the Clinton administration, the Bush administration, there certainly were some of those conflicts in foreign policy as to who was in and who was out and who was excluded. And human nature being what it is, there's no reason why that couldn't also apply to Homeland Security. And that's the concern I have. My time is running out. I just would add also that by its nature, foreign policy is in the news. I mean, people know what's going on in Afghanistan, know what's going on in Iraq. Homeland Security, as you well know, could be off the front pages for weeks, months, years at a time, as we saw between 1993 and 2001, but then it happens. And again, to keep people focused on it, whether, again, even best-intentioned people, that's why I'm leaning toward keeping that separate position so that people's attention won't be lost. And with that, I yield back, and I thank you.
Thank you very much. As I indicated, we have a series of votes underway right now that should take about an hour. So the committee will stand in recess for about 1 hour, or as soon as the last vote is taken. Excellent hearing. Well, you know, a fellow ought to know his topic before he.
Well, you know me, my friend. You know.